Good morning and welcome to this panel on a quarter century of investment promotion, success stories and future outlook. I'm Courtney Fingar, Editor-in-Chief of Investment Monitor, a digital publication focused on foreign direct investment. Well, we launched our publication in the depths of the global pandemic. And of course, there's been no shortage of things to write about in terms of covering cross-border investment. It's never been an easy job, investment promotion. I don't have to tell any of the practitioners that, but the last few years have been among the most challenging, probably in terms of the modern history of investment promotion. So I do feel for all those hardworking officials in public bodies and investment promotion agencies working hard to fight to maintain existing investments, support investors, and attract new investment at a time when global FDI flows have collapsed. What we'll do in this session is to look a little bit in the rear view mirror in terms of how investment promotion has evolved, but more importantly, look to the future and what that might look like and how the business is changing, how investment promotion agencies can work with other multilateral institutions, and do a little bit of crystal ball gazing in terms of the outlook. So just first, a very brief history lessons. Most global investment promotion agencies were created after 1990, and this really tracks with the explosion of globalization and the huge uptick in foreign direct investment flows. And this surge of institutions specializing in investment promotion in the 90s also influenced the creation of WAIPA, our host for this special track that is taking place here under the auspices of the UNCTAD World Investment Forum. And WAIPA was created in 1995 to give some shape, I suppose, to this nascent investment promotion industry and to help investment promotion agencies learn from each other and study best practice and to collaborate where necessary and where it makes sense. So again, we'll look at how this business is tracking, how investment promotion agencies are adapting to these enormous challenges, and how FDI interacts with the broader global economy and trade flows and other things that make up the universe of investment promotion. I'd like to say a big thank you to WAIPA for allowing me to lead the session. And that's enough out of me. Let's get into it. First of all, a very warm welcome to our esteemed list of speakers. We have Annette Simawimba, who's the Deputy Executive Director of the Enhanced Integrated Framework Executive Secretariat of the World Trade Organization. Welcome to you. We have Geetha Rollins, Head of Multinational Enterprises and Enterprise Engagement. This is a unit of the International Labor Organization. And we will have Natalia Bayona, who's the Director of Innovation, Education, and Investments in the UN World Tourism Organization. So thank you all for taking the time to join this discussion. But before we get into our chat, I'm delighted to say that we have a special video message from Bernardo Calzadilla, who's a Managing Director in the Directorate of Digitalization, Technology, and Agribusiness of UNIDO. Roll the video, please.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Director General of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, I'm delighted to address the participants of the 25th WAIPA World Investment Conference at today's session, a quarter century of investment promotion, success stories, and future outlook. The world remains in the midst of an unprecedented global pandemic crisis with dramatic effects on household incomes, industrial production, food security and global trade, and foreign direct investment, FDI flows. The latter declined by more than 35% in the last year. At the same time, the fourth industrial revolution has continued to spur the rapid convergence of the digital sector and traditional manufacturing, in a way that it becomes increasingly difficult to demarcate between these two areas. The new industrial paradigm is characterized by the convergence of new technological domains with advanced digital production technologies, ADP technologies. The main technologies transforming the global industrial landscape are, among others, 3D printing, big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and industrial Internet of Things. This has led to the emergence of new concepts, such as the smart factory and smart manufacturing. This trend, which had to be perceived as going too fast, is being highly disruptive, was further amplified by the enforcing emergence of the coronavirus pandemic. We have found that early adopters of digitalization who had seen the potential of digitalization for their business prior to the pandemic turned out to emerge stronger than some of their competitors, which had taken a wait-and-see approach for too long. The latter group now needs to catch up within a very short time and in a period of subsidizing cash flows. This phenomenon shows that the risk of growing divide between developed and developing countries in the context of the fourth industrial revolution is therefore very real. UNIDO's Industrial Development Report 2020 shows that important parts of the world remain excluded, whereas only 4 front-runner economies account for 77% of all innovations associated with advanced manufacturing. Our report showed that investments will be required in all areas to avoid the decoupling of developing countries in adopting and implementing advanced digital production technologies. In addition, industries, whether large or small, will not be able to embrace the benefit of the fourth industrial revolution without conducive physical and digital infrastructure such as broadband internet connection and 5G. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as already mentioned, the impact of the pandemic has been and still is dramatic, with negative effects to the operations of multinational enterprises, ranging from health-related closure or downsizing of operation, liquidity problems, dwindling local, regional, and global market demand, as well as supply chain disruptions. Investment promotion agencies, whose main role is to facilitate domestic and foreign direct investment, had to react quickly in this unprecedented situation to mitigate the damaging effects of their investor clients through investor retention and agile aftercare strategies. Some IPAs have acted very fast in moving their services online, providing guidance on effective crisis and risk management, easing or temporarily suspending some regulatory requirements, and providing options for diversification into health-related or personal protective equipment, PPE products. In Colombia, for example, UNIDO worked closely with ProColombia to launch reactivation guidelines for manufacturing SMEs in Colombia's automotive industry. These guidelines, spearheaded by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry and Tourism, had to become a national-wide reference point also for other industries. Although industrial production of Colombia's automotive suppliers have yet to reach pre-pandemic levels, the guidelines instilled new confidence in Colombian businesses to proactively engage investors and national, regional, and global buyers of their products. Similar to the business sector, the pandemic has shown a rift between IPAs that have made sufficient investment in creating a professional digital presence, leveraging instruments such as virtual site visits, online events, semi-automated inquiry handling of investors, geodata, and other versus IPAs with limited digital footprint. The rapid digitalization of IPAs is well summarized by the concept of Investment Promotion 4.0, borrowed from the term Industry 4.0, which UNIDO first introduced at its 2019 Global Manufacturing and Industrialization Summit, GMIS, and which gained even greater importance with the pandemic. In this regard, UNIDO has a long tradition of mainstreaming digital instruments in its technical cooperation support on investment promotion and will continue to do so. in the context of large-scale ongoing investment promotion program in the African, Caribbean, Pacific region, we're looking to launch a major digital solution that will allow IPAs to develop a pipeline of investment opportunities and displaying them on a global digital platform to meet global investors' interests. The platform will harness maps and geographical information systems, GIS, to facilitate the identification of interesting investment locations, for example, in relation to special economic zones or industrial parks. UNIDO has also developed a series of online courses on responsible investment and sustainable technology promotion, 2 e-learning courses on the emergence of impact investment and international business alliances have also been launched. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, host country governments and civil society have rightly so heightened their expectation vis-à-vis foreign direct investors for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, including SDG 9, on industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Being a mere bringer of foreign capital or for profit maximization is no longer considered to be enough. FDI has to transcend to become quality FDI. FDI is being increasingly scrutinized for its social and environmental contribution. Its social contribution is measured in terms of the number and types of jobs that are being created, positive approaches towards gender mainstreaming, paying fair wage and allowing workers to organize themselves and develop their skills. The environmental contribution from FDI should emanate from its role in spearheading efficient use of resources and advance the shift towards a clean, circular economy and to drive technological innovations to halt or even reverse climate change. Besides, FDI impact investment is also gaining ground, presenting a paradigm shift to conventional investment thinking by focusing on positive social and environmental change. According to the Global Investment Network, GIN, assets under management by impact investors have grown by a staggering 500% over the last 5 years, from $60 billion in 2015 to over $400 billion in 2020. Memberships in initiatives such as the UN Global Compact or the Principles for Responsible Investment, PRI, are also growing. Yet the challenge of IPAs remains to identify these newly emerging investor segments and change the investment promotion narrative, from often being a broad and unspecific towards one that provides tailored investment facilitation and policy advocacy support. UNIDO stands ready to work alongside IPAs to address these challenges in a very practical manner. One target must remain to increase the share of quality FDI or impact investments in the existing portfolios of developing countries' IPAs. An example of practical UNIDO support in this area relates to 2 global calls for innovative ideas and technologies that UNIDO's Investment Promotion Network, ITP network, launched in 2020 and 2021. Being mindful that climate change is one of the greatest global challenges of our time, UNIDO focused its 2021 call on innovative solutions in several areas, including decarbonizing growing urban environments, the generation and distribution of energy in a cleaner and smart way, the reusing, recycling, and remanufacturing of resources, and for improved land management and use. The winners of this call will be announced this year, and their projects will be referred to investment promotion agencies for practical and concrete coordination and facilitation support. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, from UNIDO, please be assured of our fullest support as we work together to address the challenges ahead towards building forward better. Let me conclude by wishing you all the best for a very successful 25th WAIPA World Investment Conference. UNIDO is grateful to WAIPA and all of its WAIPA staff for the vision and commitment in building this important partnership with us. Thank you.
Well, I think you'll agree that this speech provided some really useful context for some of the topics that we want to delve into right now. So let's begin. I'd like to start with Annette, and I hope it's okay that we use first names. I'd like to talk about the linkages between trade and FDI. So they tend to work in tandem, and the growth in the number of investment agencies post 1990, as I mentioned at the start, tracks with an overall growth in globalization and a rise in FDI. So can you maybe talk us through a bit how trade and FDI interacts and what are some of the implications of their relationship?
Thank you very much. And it's my pleasure to join the panel today. And thank you for that really important question regarding trade and the linkages, investment, sustainable development. Evidence has shown that foreign direct investment stimulates the growth of imports and exports in the short and long term for strategic sectors. FDI benefits also extend to technology transfers, job creation, and local subcontracting. And these benefits are even more evident in LDCs as they have clear linkages to sustainable development outcomes. At the EIF, for those that might not be aware of the work that we do, we focus very much on the LDC constituency, improving productive capacity, strengthening institutional capacity, all of that aimed at ensuring that there's improved trade. Our mission is to indeed empower LDCs to use trade and investment, and that's a key word for us. To integrate into global trade for sustainable development and policy and poverty reduction. We've captured these elements very clearly in our strategic plan, and some of the areas, and recognizing that there are a number of actors in investment promotion and the linkages to trade and sustainable development, our main emphasis is on improving the evidence base for policy and regulatory frameworks for trade and investment in the LDCs. And of course, there's a lot of institutional coordination required. So we also support and strengthen those coordination mechanisms for trade, development, and investment. As we all will be aware, LDC economies have continued to be disproportionately affected by the economic fallouts of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so in this context, investments to boost trade are more pressing than ever. And we also will realize now that the competition for investment resources is even tighter. Each country is trying to recover, and each country is trying to attract as much investment as it could to boost sectors that have been affected. And so it's important for the LDCs to improve their service offerings. And for this to happen, skills are required. The policy environment must be right. For sustainable development, the reach must also be far and wide, and this to be leveraged. The role of the private sector is very, very important, particularly MSMEs that must also join value chains. That's where sustainable development, those are some of the facets of sustainable development: inclusion, women, the youth, small and micro enterprises, making sure all of these are engaged in the value chains and that they can also attract investments. Of course, of critical importance is the empowerment of investment promotion agencies, as they are an important component investment in the investment promotion landscape. And I did speak about coordination and those mechanisms for coordination. And we see that they will need to reorient their service offerings to become higher end and to meet the needs of investors. Areas of strategic importance for investment promotion agencies, particularly in LDCs, will include a strengthened online presence and more robust policy advocacy roles within government. And so in collaboration with WAIPA, and I'm happy that I'm really part of this and we have them on the call as well, we're working to strengthen institutional coordination and to improve the capacities and skills of IPAs and officials from trade and sector ministries. It's not often that they come together as sectors that are both collaborating towards a mutual outcome. So we are happy to be participating in this process and bringing them together. And this includes enhancing their abilities for investment promotion and facilitation, leveraging investments in priority trade sectors, improving coordination via regional and global networking coordination, as well as advocacy. And the goal ultimately is to see improvements in the business climate and investment conditions and the attraction of sustainable investments, as well as leveraging additional resources to development sectors to meet the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you, and I hope that really responds to the question that you put to me. Thank you very much, Courtney.
Thank you. Yes, indeed, that answers the questions very well. And I think this topic of sustainable investment is one we're probably going to come back to because of its importance in the FDI and global development paradigm. And really, I think to summarize a little bit, some of your key arguments really is around a holistic approach in terms of joining up the work of investment promotion agencies, multilateral institutions, and crucially, the private sector. And I think you reiterated also the call that we heard in the opening video about the importance of embracing digitalization as a means of having more efficient investment promotions. So quite a few things to build on there as we go further into our discussion. I'd like to turn to Geetha now. Annette mentioned about the LDCs, and I know this is an area where the ILO, I understand, is quite active. So if you could tell us a little bit about that, and also more generally, how the organization works with WAIPA and how it offers support to investment promotion agencies.
Yes, thank you very much, Courtney, for this question. And I would like to thank WAIPA again for inviting the International Labour Organization to participate in this 25th WAIPA World Investment Conference. As always, it's a pleasure for us to participate in these discussions. The International Labour Organization is another specialized agency of the United Nations. We already heard Bernardo from UNIDO. Of course, UNIDO focusing very much on industrialization, and ILO focusing on more and better jobs around the world. We have 187 member states. So basically all countries around the world are members of the ILO, and we work with governments, social partners in putting in place a legislative framework to ensure not only quantity, but also the quality of the jobs. And just to highlight a bit how within the ILO we've been working maybe on investment over the past years, because you mentioned it also in your opening, how in the past 25 years and with increased globalization, of course, there has been the setup of investment promotion agencies, WAIPA and so on. But actually in the ILO, we've always recognized the importance of foreign direct investment and trade as a leverage to achieve decent work around the world. And in the 70s already, we adopted a specific instrument that focused on stimulating the positive contribution that multinationals can make when they make investments, primarily in developing countries, of course, including LDC countries, but developing countries in general. So the positive contribution that they can make through their foreign direct investment and linkages with national enterprises, but also how to mitigate and resolve potential negative impacts. And I think that is something that is still on the table, of course. Now the whole discussions on responsible business conduct and especially, I would say, in LDCs, where often the balance in power between large multinational enterprises and LDC are, I would say, unequal in many cases, and of course where there's a lot of focus on how to support LDCs in actually getting a better negotiating power in achieving those or in attracting those sustainable investments that should really contribute to inclusive economic growth and opportunities for decent work. So as I said, in the 70s, we adopted this tripartite declaration concerning multinational enterprises and social policy that was for a long time our focus, working directly with multinational enterprises on making a positive contribution to decent work, especially in developing countries. But then, of course, also our understanding moved over the years in also identifying, not only working with governments and mainly ministries of labor, obviously, but and the social partners, but also understanding the importance that investment promotion agencies actually play in attracting the right kind of investment. And we've used the words, sustainable investment. Bernardo was also making the reference, of course, to the social and environmental elements of foreign direct investment attraction or facilitation. And so we've shifted also our attention on closer collaboration with investment promotion agencies in our member states around the world. And of course, in the context of that, the partnership with WAIPA that we signed in 2016. And I think the time when we signed that cooperation agreement is actually very telling, because of course it was a year after the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, a year after the adoption of the Addis Ababa Financing for Development agenda. And, in the context of the SDGs, and I think we will be coming back to those, but in the context, of course, of the SDGs, we particularly focus on SDG 8, on inclusive economic development, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. And that combined, obviously, with the Financing for Development agenda, clearly was the basis for our cooperation with WAIPA and with, of course, the WAIPA IPA members from around the world. And as such, just, to highlight how over the past 5 years, and I think we can be quite proud actually of this, we've been running workshops, masterclasses with investment promotion agencies from around the world, together with WAIPA, but also together with UNIDO, UNCTAD, and other international organizations, in really building the understanding of IPAs on how investment attraction could better link to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. I think these are very much appreciated by the IPAs. In addition, and this was already mentioned by Annette, of course, the whole focus on the LDC countries, because they are, as I said previously, in a very particular situation of how they really should be further capacitated in terms of attracting, again, the right kind of investment. We're not only talking about the quantity, but more importantly, the quality of that investment that indeed contributes to inclusive economic growth and allow these countries to upgrade and develop in a very inclusive way. So I will leave it at that, and I'm sure we will have the time to go further into details into some of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And I do want to continue discussing the SDGs and come back to Annette first on that. I mean, you mentioned, Geetha mentioned about attracting the right investment, and that's really central to, I guess, the ethos of the Sustainable Development Goals. What interests me at this moment in time is having lower FDI flows, so fewer projects out there to compete for. Many national economies reeling an urgent need to create jobs. Annette, how do we get that balance right between staying focused on productive investment, responsible investment, given the targets that a lot of investment promotion agencies have to bring in FDI, create jobs? And I guess if I throw in another question, the SDGs were already kind of off track in terms of potentially being achievable by 2030, and the pandemic seems to have blown them even further off target. Can we get there? How do we do it? And how do we get those balances right? Oh, you're muted, Annette. Apologies.
Thank you very much. It's a really difficult time now with the constraints in resources. We are behind on the SDGs, And I think there's a huge role that the private sector could play, and leveraging private sector investments, I think, is one of a key issue that we may want to focus on as an enabler for progress towards the SDGs. So leveraging also aid for trade, and as I speak as an organization that utilizes aid for trade to spur development in the LDCs, together and combined with private sector investment to mobilize local productive capacity, in my view, would be essential. Evidence-based prioritization and programming are key to promoting investments in some of the strategic sectors. And I think we, as a program in the EAF, we take a lot of time doing a lot of analytical work, and we do have a publication we refer to as the Diagnostic Trade Integration Study. And through this analytical work, we're able to identify where the best, what are the best sectors that would that require investments to be able to spur that development, and through which we can leverage funding or investments from other development partners, from government resources, and also from the private sector. And I think I've seen this work in some of the countries, and I'll give, for example, in Mali, where we've had some investments. So this is aid for trade resources being invested in a country. And we've had double that amount of investment coming in from the government. So complementing the funding that the EIF has provided, that has triggered 2 times that amount from government, and additional funding as well from the donors to be able to ensure that sectors such as the shea butter or the mango value chains have the necessary investments that they need to be able to grow and develop, and of course involve various actors. Women are involved, the youth are involved in all of these sectors. So maybe in short, really leveraging aid for trade, leveraging private sector investment, leveraging all of these investments that could be targeted to very, very specific sectors, and maybe concentrating on those sectors of most impact. I hope that really gives you some flavor of what is possible.
Yes, thank you. Very, very good points there. Geeta, is there anything you would like to add in terms of meeting the challenge of achieving these goals at a time when there's so little FDI flowing around?
Yes, I think, I mean, there are many discussions indeed, and when we do the trainings of the IPAs with this focus on the sustainable development goals, and you mentioned it actually previously as well. I mean, the IPAs are under a lot of pressure to attract, you know, they have targets of the investment they should be attracting. And I think what we are trying to also do is actually in a way look at, you know, of course you need a certain amount of investment to be able to develop, but how do you make sure that investment also goes into either the right sectors, or it goes to the right kind of projects that indeed contribute to productive capacity development in the country, that has then potential to create more and better jobs, and actually allows for the development of the country. And I think in the current context, you know, of course, also of the impact of COVID, it has generated a reflection. And I think in many parts of the UN, and of course, I mean, here we are talking again about very high level, you know, discussions, including, of course, with the Secretary General and his call, and also the call in the ILO, in terms of coming to really refocus again on what the SDGs were all about, namely a human-centered and environmental-centered development paradigm, if I may say it like this, where really people and planet should be at the focus of inclusive economic development. And you know, we really think it is important that we work with the IPAs also on the kind of key performance indicators. And the more that we actually are able to work with the IPAs so that they can give these kind of messages also to their respective ministries. And I don't remember who in the previous speakers was talking about the importance of getting this coherent approach, you know, of at the moment we see too much. At the one hand, you have investment attraction, you have trade agreements, you have, you know, other ministries focusing on other elements. In our case, also the ministries of labor, you know, coming up with employment policies and skills development policies. But how do you basically make sure they are all integrated, focusing on the potential sectors indeed that have a lot of potential for development? And I think Annette already mentioned that as well. But how can we make sure this comes together? And in this context, I just want to highlight briefly, you know, we are currently conducting together with WAIPA a survey actually of investment promotion agencies and how they are currently working actually with in mind their contribution to specifically Sustainable Development Goal 8. And the objective is to really identify what are some of the good practices that are currently out there already with IPAs. Then how can we better share these kind of practices with other IPAs to get a better understanding of what is actually possible, but also to identify, you know, what are the further supporting, you know, tools or measures that we also as ILO can develop together with WAIPA and the investment promotion agencies. It can be in terms of, you know, key performance indicators. It can be in terms of setting up more dialogue platforms at the country level where, you know, the different parties can come together to really look at what is needed at the country level to put in place the frameworks for this more integrated approach of investment attraction leading to inclusive economic growth, better jobs, you know, more respect for the environment. And again, with a specific emphasis, I think, on those that really need it the most, which are the LDC countries, but not only limited to them. It's also working in a way with some of the home countries also of multinational enterprises, and we haven't focused on that, but also the role on home country governments of definitely the investment made by multinational enterprises in terms of, you know, how are they also stimulating a positive contribution of multinational enterprises, specifically in countries where there are weak governance systems and where, as I said previously, the negotiating power might not be that big compared to some of the you know, negotiating power of multinational enterprises.
Indeed, and you mentioned about the integrated approach, which does seem to be absolutely essential to making this work, but is very hard to put into practice. Easy to say we need to do it, hard to put in practice, but we have to keep up those efforts, I suppose, if we're going to get anywhere. Thank you for your comments. We have Natalia with us now. Natalia joining us from the UN World Tourism Organization. So welcome, Natalia. Let's talk tourism for a moment. Tourism is obviously a major driver of FDI and is a key target sector for a number of IPAs globally. But it's an understatement to say it's been a rough few years for the tourism industry. So Natalia, where are we now? And what are the prospects and what role can tourism FDI play in a global recovery?
Thank you, Courtney. It's my pleasure to be with you and, of course, with powerful women talking about investments. And as you know, tourism is the top employer of women. So I'm glad to say that foreign direct investment has been a key element for tourism development. Nonetheless, tourism international arrivals dropped by 74%. And I have to say that during the pandemic, foreign direct investment dropped as well by 74%. Nonetheless, I have to say that investments in terms of technology have increased during the pandemic. More than $22 billion were invested via venture capital investments and corporate ventures to startups. So that's a strong message currently, because of course, this is the way we can promote more green, sustainable, and of course, innovative ideas in order to rebound the sector. When it comes, Courtney, on the foreign direct investment, I have to say that, of course, hotels have been like the segment in tourism, or the subsector in tourism, that has empowered more projects regarding foreign direct investments. The last year, there were more than 1,000 new prospect hotel projects inside the world. And of course, by far, I have to say that the top countries receiving foreign direct investment when we are talking about tourism are Spain, Mexico, Philippines, and of course, China. So with that said, today, what we see in the UNWTO is that, of course, investments is the way to help not only on the tourism rebounding, it's also the way to help on the creation of a new model, where green investments that, as you know, this year, for example, during the pandemic, this year, for the first time, a private equity destination capital launched the first green bond focused in tourism with a strong alliance with Bank of America. On the other side, we have been working with the IFC, our sister agency, regarding all the incentives that we can create in order to help the hotels to create and to reform a little bit their business strategies into a more business and green oriented strategies. But today what we see inside the UNWTO is that, of course, the green investments are here to stay. That's what we need to empower more in order to create a better model. Nonetheless, we need here the power of governments to create and to innovate in regulations and in tourism incentives for investors. So of course, today, Courtney, we have experienced a lot of tax relief and different legal initiatives that are basics today, or that are fundamentals to those prospect investments. So we need to move forward a little bit to innovate on the law and to give incentives to those that are bringing and creating ecological capital, human capital, and economic capital. So only by creating public policies that can help the empowerment of those three types of capitals, we will be able to lead by example, not only the recovery of an economic sector, but also we can lead by example the way investors can create a more resilient, a more social impact, and of course, a more sustainable and innovative tourism economic sector.
Thank you. And you discussed about the importance of startups and innovation. Do you feel that investment promotion agencies are supporting and encouraging enough this type of innovation, and how can they best work with startups in the industry?
Of course, absolutely. What I see is that what we need is the power. Of course, I see that the tourism investment promotion agencies are doing their job. They are promoting the creation of an innovative startup ecosystem specialized in tourism, and they are giving incentives in order to create innovation hubs focused and specialized in tourism. Nonetheless, once again, we need the power of creating modern laws, modern regulations that can help to incentivize the power of innovators. I give you an example. There is only less than 5% of the lawyers in the world are specialists in tourism regulation. So of course, Courtney, when Airbnb came, where Uber came, that as you know, transport is part of the tourism sector, when those strong innovative initiatives came, the lack of specialists on innovation in terms of regulation blocked a little bit the development and the agility of the soft landing of those technologies in different markets. So of course, if we want to create an investment culture focused on innovation, modernizing the regulation and having a specialists in law firms and of course inside the governments that knows about technology and about the power of technology with tourism is mandatory if we want that this revolution of startups can be more proactive and can help not only the creation of new ventures, but also the scalability and the internationalization of those ventures.
Indeed, and Natalia, we spoke earlier in quite some depth about the Sustainable Development Goals with Annette and Geeta giving their advice on how we can best leverage FDI to help achieve them. So I'll ask you a similar question about tourism industry. You discussed about some of the green initiatives. So where is the tourism industry in terms of being a potential facilitator of achievement of the SDGs, and in particular, the role of tourism FDI and all of that?
That's a very important question, Courtney. So first of all, when it comes to the Sustainable Development Goals, I have to say that, of course, tourism is the most human economic sector. So by far, when you talk about the SDGs, we need to understand that our sector is transversal. So when we talk that this is the economic sector that empowers the most number of women, we are talking, of course, about gender equality. When we are talking about innovation with partnerships, as you have seen, the UNWTO have developed different startup competitions, joining efforts between governments and private sector. So tourism by far is one of the top enabling sectors that can enable the Sustainable Development Goals into practice. And that's why part of what we are doing is developing innovation challenges, innovation forums, education curricula that have to be, of course, aligned with sustainability, with new technologies, and by far with a new way of thinking where humans are the basis of the economy, and of course, youth empowerment lead part of this revolution. And of course, part of the mandate of the UNWTO is to work with the member states in order to make possible and to jump from the theory to the practice by developing different initiatives that can rebound the sector and that can help the sector to lead by example with different practices. So as I said before, investments are crucial here because the more green investments the sector is becoming, the more new initiatives will come into the sector, and the more sustainable and tech for good in this case we will use in order to create a better understanding when it comes to the tourism economic sector.
Thank you very much. And we have just a couple minutes left here, and I want to circle back to Annette and Geeta as we try to round out our discussion. We'll look a little bit to the future. And Annette, I'd like to ask, what's your expectation in terms of recovery for trade and along with that, maybe FDI flows?
Thank you very much. I think the future is bright, but there are challenges, of course, that must be overcome. And I think that Natalia raised some really, really important issues around skills, around the need that I was writing on. I didn't have my pen close by, so I was writing on my phone. So the need for regulations, policies, laws, the need for specialists that have these skills to be able to traverse the very complicated environment for investment attraction. So IPAs must have these skills. And she also mentioned the private sector and the need for these skills to be able to support that whole process at the packaging. And that's a role that we play at the EIF and working together with WIPA, of course. So if we can continue to identify those relevant skills, especially for the LDCs, and build that capacity, I think we will be able to traverse an already difficult environment that has been brought about due to COVID-19. I also talked about partnerships. Partnerships will continue to be very, very important. And this is so because as governments come to grips with the challenges, there's increased pressure on our government resources. And while governments do see all of these investment sectors as critical for development, the resources are minimal, they're very scarce. And so partnerships, leveraging all of these resources targeted at very specific sectors, I think that should also see us overcome some of the difficulties. Of course, we've heard of the numbers, the amount of investments that are required to meet SDG growth. UNCTAD has quantified this amount to a GDP growth requirement of 9% per annum to eradicate extreme poverty, or alternatively, a much higher 20% annual growth rate to achieve a structural transformation, especially in the LDCs. And so meeting this requirement will require concerted efforts and support at the international level. And I think partnerships, working together, collaborating, of course, within our various strengths, ILO, WIPA, UNWTO, all of us coming together and building this capacity and supporting productive sectors, tourism, all of those, I think, should give us a really good outlook for the future. Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you. Some very good calls to action there. And Geetha, we just have a minute or so left, but I'd like to hear your kind of final thoughts and what we should be thinking about as we move into the future.
Well, I just want to add, I mean, support everything that Annette was saying in relation to looking to the future. I think at the moment we are in a really important period of reflection. I think COVID just has had that effect of, we are rethinking, and we see in practice a lot of companies are rethinking as well in terms, of course, of their business models and so on. And of course, as UN agencies, we should be very aware of that and actually also see how we can support actually these kind of changes that are happening, support them to go in the right direction, keeping the SDGs as our benchmark or as our ultimate goals of what we are there to achieve. And as I said again, the partnerships are critical, the integrated approach are important, and how we can really scale up, I think also our support for IPAs in playing the key role that they should be playing in steering investment in their countries towards achieving national development goals in the context of sustainable development goals. And if I just may, in the interventions of Natalia, I think on tourism, you see a lot of developments at the moment in tourism. And just from a labor point of view, I think as well, you see actually a lot of people have moved out of the sector also because, not the working conditions were not always good. Now, we are coming into a new kind of, I would say, negotiating power for some of the workers in that sector as well. So let's use this time really for reflection on how, I would say, the environmental and social performance in these sectors and in other sectors also can be improved, and what the role of investment and trade is to actually achieve this.
Thank you. Thank you. And indeed, there's a lot of work still to do. FDI and trade will continue to play critical roles, and along with that, investment promotion agencies as those entities being out at the sharp end of FDI. Thank you again to WIPA for allowing me to lead this extremely interesting discussion. I've enjoyed it. I hope our viewers have as well. And of course, most of all, thank you to Annette, Geetha, and Natalia for sharing your and insightful thoughts on this topic. And I wish you success in these continued collaborative efforts and success for the remainder of the World Investment Forum.